Good evening and welcome to NIN Live. I am Saumya Tiwari and today we are in conversation with Professor Dr. Param Srikantia, the renowned professor of Baldwin Wallace University. This show is brought to you by the Arjun Foundation. Without further ado, let us welcome Professor Param Srikantia.
Thank you so much, Saumya. It's a pleasure to be on this program, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be able to speak to the audience.
Thank you, sir. We too are elated to have you with us. So before we start with our show, I would like to introduce our audience to you. So, sir, also known as Param, is a professor and an author and an Osho devotee who attracts upon 20 years of management experience in 6 international conglomerates. Before becoming a member of the college at Baldwin Wallace University, Dr. Srikantia became a representative at a global economic institution. Moreover, Sir has also been a speaker at TED. Sir, it is our privilege and honor to host you today.
Thank you so much, Saumya, and I want to quickly express my very sincere and heartfelt gratitude to Swami Shailendra Saraswati for introducing me to all of you, and to Ms. Hemangi also for bringing me into this circle. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now we'll start with the first question, and I think this first question is very special to you. So you're a very firm believer in the teachings of Osho, and it is remarkable how you start all your discussions by talking or showing your reverence towards him. So this question comes more from a state of curiosity. How did you first come across Osho, and in what ways has his teachings molded your worldview today?
Thank you so much, Saumya. It was, I think, in the year 2008 that I was just on the web, browsing different books and everything. And some people had told me about Osho and his books and discourses. I was in the US, and it is to my everlasting regret that I had not discovered Osho while I was in India. So after I had emigrated to the US, so I was on the internet and I happened to land on the Book of Secrets. I said, so many people have talked to me about Osho, maybe I should spend a little time discovering his writings. And as you know, the Book of Secrets is one of his very famous compilations. And I was reading it off the internet screen. I just read 2 paragraphs, and I was struck almost like a bolt of lightning. And it elevated me to a totally different state. So I ordered a whole lot of Osho books. One of the first books that arrived in the mail was called Joy. And I started reading it. I read it nonstop for 5 hours. My son was 9 or 10 years old at that time. He still remembers the day. He said, the day my father read that book, my life changed for the better, which means that I became a better father to him after I read Joy. So the transformation was very powerful. And in fact, I went to my university and I said, look, there's something I would like to share. And I've put together a monologue where I want to share some of Osho's insights, and I have put it together as a 4 to 6 hour monologue. So you know what a monologue is? There's one person talking all the time. So I converted my love of Osho into a 4 to 6 hour speech. I have also spoken for 12 hours nonstop, sharing my love of Osho. It must have been hard on the audience, but it was very enjoyable to me. And over several years, I'm so pleased and happy that I have introduced thousands of people whom I never have heard of Osho and his superluminousness, to Osho's books and discourses. So that's what gives me most pleasure in life today, to be able to share Osho's works with those who may not otherwise come across him. And of course, in the East, we make a distinction between a realized person, a master, and a teacher. I'm certainly not a master. If you see the state of my life and how much I struggle every day, I'm certainly not a master, but I'm a teacher. I love sharing what I've heard. So it's almost like I try to reach as many people as I can through my presentations with my love of Osho. And I want to leave it to them to discover his brilliance. So I see myself as one of many of Osho's boatmen. Why do I say boatman? It's almost like Osho is sitting on the other shore, and I would like to fill my boat and take people to that shore and leave them there so that they can learn from him.
Param, that was beautiful. My next question to you is, in the same line as my previous question. So, does spirituality play a vital role when it comes to the holistic development of an individual, especially when it comes to a person's work life?
Absolutely. So I want to begin first by talking about a little bit about Osho's impact on how I experienced the effect of his spirituality on my own life. One of the things I always remember in my everyday life is what Osho reminded us, that we sometimes go to a movie and we forget that it's a movie, and then we start getting so excited, siding with the good people and yelling at the bad people, or crying when something terrible happens in the movie. So we mistake the movie to be real life and we get so identified with it. Osho reminds us, instead, watch your own life like it's a movie. So when I've started watching my own life like it's a movie, even when a tragedy happens or something terrible happens, I can say, oh my God, my movie just got a little more interesting. So I've been able to preserve a joyous sense of humor, which is something that Osho talked about, a non-serious spirituality. Because very often people take spirituality to be such a serious business. And to Osho, spirituality was something to be celebrated. It was a very light-hearted thing. So it has helped me to maintain my sense of humor even when difficult situations arise. Another very major thing, I think, to your question about work life, is we can approach our work life, we can approach our home life, we can approach life from one of four places, says Osho. And this is one of the most powerful parts of his teaching. He says we can approach it from the point of view of a scientist. So Osho invokes the metaphor of a rose. He says you look at a rose, and the scientist will say, how can I understand this rose scientifically? He or she will dissect the rose, cut it, place it under a microscope, and try to discover it scientifically. Now, a business person will have a different approach to the rose. He or she will look at the rose and say, how much can I sell this rose for? How much profit can I make out of this rose? Now, in the modern world, the scientific and the business orientation is what has characterized our approach to life. We go to work, we are analyzing people, we are being very logical about everything, or we are looking at how can I use this for my own benefit. So business and science has dominated our worldview. What Osho brings up are two other alternatives to experiencing life, our work, people around us. One is the view of the artist. So unlike the scientist who wants to dissect the rose, the artist says, no, I want to celebrate the beauty of the rose. I would never cut the rose. It would be such a violent thing to do. Instead, let me maybe paint the rose in all its beautiful colors. Maybe write a poem about the rose. Maybe take a photo of the rose with different kinds of lighting on it. You want to exaggerate the beauty of the rose. Imagine if we started approaching each other like we were works of art. If I looked at you not as just a person, but as a work of art, and I'm trying to immerse myself in discovering people's inner and outer beauty, life becomes like a walk through the gallery or like a museum, celebrating everybody. And the fourth orientation that Osho talks about, which is very powerful, is that of the mystic. So you're not being a scientist, you're not being an artist, you're not being a business person, but you're a mystic. What does the mystic do? He or she celebrates the mystery of life. Like the scientist wants to reduce the mystery of life with knowledge and logic and evidence, the mystic wants to dance with the mystery of life and really exaggerate the mystery. Look at this beautiful rose. Where did its beauty come from? When it dies tomorrow, where will the beauty disappear? So many mysteries of the world. And I think in the modern world, we have forgotten the beauty of mystery because we are only looking for answers. And I would say that in the holistic life of individuals, there was a time where people went to work only to achieve performance objectives, your goals, the amount of money you make. And all of a sudden, we have begun to realize that people are also spiritual beings. They're not just economic beings. In fact, there are 5 stages through which we have looked at people when they go to work. The first stage, we were actually looking at people as economic entities. So if you came to work in my company, you were an economic entity, which meant that I have to just see how much work and productivity I can get from you. And then the second stage, we started looking at people as social entities, which meant that we recognized that people form relationships at work. So if we do team building activities, people will be more productive. The third stage, we started looking at people as competencies. What do we mean? What is the knowledge and skill that they need to do their job? The fourth stage, we started looking at people as emotional entities. All of a sudden, we said there's something called emotional intelligence, that people are able to exchange emotions during an interaction, and we pay attention to that. We are now beyond all these four stages. We have recognized and awakened to the idea that people are spiritual entities. Unless they find a deeper sense of meaning and purpose in their work, and unless they feel that they are uh, transcending and overcoming and spiritually attaining to new heights of ecstasy, their day-to-day life will be completely meaningless.
Param, I honestly am awestruck by your answer, and I think you have assisted in giving our audience a new perspective towards spirituality. So that was beautiful. Now,
Hardly a
coming,
news perspective, Soumya ji, because I'm just trying to communicate best whatever little I have been able to absorb of Osho's infinite oceanic wisdom. Thank you.
thank you, sir. So, my next question to you comes from the fact that you are extremely well read about organizational behavior. So, how do you think it differs amongst the United States, United Kingdom, and India? Moreover, which one does your experience tell you assists in yielding higher efficiency?
Excellent question. Thank you so much. So, I want to first contrast my experiences of the many years that I worked in India before I emigrated to the US with the American approach just a little bit as I understand it. Now, I also want to caution that, every human being is unique, special, and extraordinary. Every individual is different. So, every organization will be different. So, when I speak of India, US, and UK in terms of generalizations, we have to admit that those generalizations have limitations. They may not accurately describe every situation correctly. So, one of the major differences that I found between Indian and US organizations, in my view, is that many US organizations are very much focused on performance excellence, not so much on learning and growth. For the years that I worked in training and development and those fields and human resources development in India, I found the Indian business culture to be much more concerned with employee development, with recognizing that people are not just economic entities. It's not just how much they accomplish in a day, but that people are spending 8 to 9 hours at work. How are they growing in different ways? So greater emphasis on learning and development. I feel the Western American model is all about profits and about what they call the bottom line. So the emphasis on performance, very little on learning and growth. And I know that the grass looks greener from the other side. So when I lived in India, I was looking up to the US in terms of what organizational practices they might create. It took me coming to the US to really understand how much more shallow the American commitment was and how much deeper the Indian commitment was, to a holistic employee growth and development. I would have never known that had I not lived and worked in the US. I would have always imagined, as they say, the grass is greener on the other side. The American organizations are modeled after a machine. You think about it, right? We think in metaphors. The movie Forrest Gump, where he says, "What's life? Life is a box of chocolates. You never know what you get." Similarly, what is an organization? To most senior managers in America, an organization is a machine. There's an input, there's a core transformation process, there's an output. Garrett Morgan wrote a book called Images of Organization, where he said, this idea that the organization is a machine has had some very negative effects. Because if the organization is a machine, who is the employee? He's just a part of a machine, or she's just a cog in the wheel of a machine. What does that happen? What do you do with a machine part? You just toss it and replace it any time. And that is why you see the loss of respect for the dignity and sacredness of human beings in modern organizations, because organizations are run like machines. Now, my experience, now I worked with the Tatas at that time and with a few other companies, was at least my experience of the Tatas at that time, and I know that and not everybody might agree with the experience, was that it wasn't run like a machine. It was run like a family. So in a family, the relationships are very different, and I think that is one of the major differences. What is the metaphor? Do you run your organization like a machine, or do you run it like a family? And I think it, Americans tend to view work and they compartmentalize it, in my opinion. They say, this is just a job. And at least my involvement in Indian organizations led me to believe that it was never just a job. It was something deeper. It was something more sacred. It was a calling. And I remember one of the companies that I worked in, which was one of the largest enterprises in India, the CEO would spend hours and hours delivering educational and training programs to the employees. Most CEOs would never do that. They would just be involved in business decisions. And I think that is kind of symbolic of the value that Indian culture has placed on education, growth, and training, which is such a unique and distinctive aspect of our culture and how it shapes work practices. The few British organizations that I worked with and European organizations, let me point out to a few differences. For example, when one of the European companies that I worked with, they would rotate you through many different jobs. So even if you did not have the education or qualifications, they would still expose you to that work because they believed that they were hiring you not for a job, but for a career. Which meant that if this experience, for example, I interviewed for a personnel manager, but I was actually sent to a soap factory to manage operations there. Now, I wouldn't be a good soap factory manager, but they said it's not all about being a good soap factory manager. You have to understand the factory environment, and that's why we are sending you there. So many European companies hire you for a career, not for a job. So they're less concerned with your short-term performance and more with your long-term growth and development. I would say that's one of the many differences. When American organizations interview you, they tend to be very focused on your previous experience. When the UK organizations, in my view, are not just narrowly focused on your previous experience, they're focused on the overall level of talent and creativity that you're bringing. So if I have problem-solving skills, maybe there are 5 different jobs where I can be successful. So that's those are some of the differences that I've found. And of course, I think in my experience of European organizations, and once again, I know that these are generalizations, is that they encourage you to speak your mind. Like, it is okay to argue ferociously and fiercely with your bosses in order to find a better solution. My own experience of American organizations is that there's so much of an emphasis on surface level politeness. So you have to be polite and you have to wear a mask, and with the unfortunate consequence that you really don't have the deep discussions and arguments that you need in order to come up with the best solutions.
Param, deriving from the point that you said that there is loss of dignity. So my next question is something on the lines of that only. How can one attain work-life balance when their financial standing is taken into consideration? For example, there is an unemployment problem in India. And since the jobs are on the verge of shrinkage, a number of graduates, again a generalization, but a number of people, a number of graduates who get recruited are made to work overtime and are underpaid. So in these cases, how can one attain a work-life balance?
I think it is impossible to attain or speak about work-life balance unless people are treated fairly, especially in economic terms. So I don't want to sit here and preach spirituality to people who might be struggling with insane work hours, with very low salaries, and I think Osho was very clear about this, that some of the needs of, physiological needs of food, thirst, hunger, these have to be met, that there has to be at least a basic financial foundation. I think it is very tragic that humanity has followed the guidance of the economists. What does economics tell you? Pay people as little as you need to make sure that they come to work. And then that's a fair wage. And I think that is very damaging. The entire field of economics is, in my view, very an insult to human dignity. It is whatever you need to pay people, if you can pay people as little as you can, and if they show up at work, that is enough. And I think that is so destructive of human potential. We are destroying potential, human potential, by keeping people on the brink of starvation. And all the poverty and hunger that we see, I had a mentor who once told me, this is deliberate, this is intended. It is not that it is a problem. We are doing it deliberately, because if we want people to do work that the rich people don't want to do, we keep people on the poverty line so that people are forced to do that work. And unfortunately, this uh, pattern of exploitation has continued. I want to quote Osho's insights on this for a moment. There's a beautiful passage where Osho said, is poverty the problem, or is greed the problem? Why have we never seen a bird that is poor? And I want to go back to this. Many people will say poverty is the problem. I used to work at the World Bank, which spends millions of dollars researching poverty. Do you get how absurd that is? You're spending millions of dollars trying to study poverty, to make a theory of poverty. Well, is that a good use of the money? And we tend to think poverty is the problem. Why? Because we ask the rich people what is the problem, and they say, look at those people, the poor people, they are the problem, poverty is the problem. Osho asked, is poverty the problem, or is greed the problem? Think about it. How can you see the relationship between greed and poverty? And he asks, have you ever seen a bird that is poor? Because as human beings, me included, I'm hoarding, trying to have more than I find necessary. And we spend thousands of dollars trying to study poverty. How much money do we spend trying to study greed? And unless we look at the relationship between greed and poverty, we are never going to be able to deal with the situation. So because we have legitimized greed, we have created a field of economics which has made it okay for people to be economically and financially disenfranchised, because for so many years we taught people that the whole purpose of the corporation is to increase shareholder wealth. Now, if you believe that the whole purpose of a company is to increase shareholder wealth, can you see how the employees will be exploited, how the customers will be exploited? None of the other stakeholders will be taken care of. Now, this model has been so much prevalent in American economics and in the American outlook to life. And it is at least nice that there are many European and other economists who are beginning to challenge this view.
This was very new to me when you talk about a study has been done and millions have been spent to study poverty, when the same amount of money could have been utilized in, bringing about a positive impact or uplifting them in any way. And I think it is our privilege today to get to know about a number of facts from somebody who's experienced enough and who could actually guide us on these topics. So that answer was very well put together, Param. And it raised a number of questions in my mind too as to how we view the society. And that was just beautiful. But then another quality of yours that I came to know about is I am intrigued by the fact that how you teach your students in the university. And therefore, my next question is on the same lines. So you have been a professor in Baldwin Wallace University for an extremely long time, which actually permits you to understand the mind state of a very diverse batch of students. So, what differences have you come across in the critical thinking patterns and willingness to understand opposing perspectives in your recent batches as opposed to the ones you taught earlier?
It's an excellent question, Saumya ji. Thank you for that. I want to begin by saying that one of the major differences, so I want to outline a few differences, but I want to take a few minutes to focus on one major difference. So the few differences that I see is a greater respect for other cultures. The younger people, because of globalization and the internet, are actually developing a greater understanding, sensitivity, and respect for other cultures. And I think another major difference is that this young generation of students now has begun to see that so many things that we had faith in and just trusted blindly have failed us. For example, economics, the financial collapse of 2008. Many of the young people today were little kids who are in my college today were little children when the financial collapse happened. So all of a sudden they began to see that the experts who claim to have all the knowledge don't know much, because when we placed the economy at the hands of the economists, they collapsed it. So there isn't the faith in economics that we had. Similarly, many of the students today have come from families where they have seen divorce. So an institution like marriage that people had blind faith in, they're beginning to question, is this really an institution that is keeping up with the times? So there's been a lot of faith in marriage. They have begun to see the climate chaos and the global warming that has happened when we have left these questions to politicians and business people. So they're beginning to lose faith in business and politics. They're recognizing that the planet that they will inherit in a few years is on the brink of collapse. So overall, there has been a collapse of faith. The blind faith that we had in experts is beginning to wither away. Now, I want to focus on the first point that I made about respect for other cultures. So, if you will allow me for a few minutes to explain in a dramatic fashion the relationship between spirituality and worldview. So, I want to talk about how one of the major challenges in education is that while people like Osho reminded us that an enlightened consciousness has to go beyond the mind, most education today is not about helping people to go beyond the mind. It's about getting people to have a better mind. So imagine it's making problems worse, because what Osho and the great sages have told us is knowledge is not the answer. The mind can argue anything, whereas most education today is about giving more knowledge, not wisdom, and strengthening the mind. So I want to take a small example and illustrate something for you. We have all heard of something called the chattering monkey. Sages like Osho and others have talked about the monkey mind. And I want to make it clear to you I always carry my friend here, Curious George, the chattering monkey. So this monkey is sitting on my shoulder talking to me continuously, even while you're talking to me. And I bet many of your viewers will recognize that even while I'm talking to them, the monkey in their head is talking to them. My monkey is saying, I hope Saumya ji, Hemangi ji, and Swami Shailendra Saraswati think this session is good. I hope they don't regret having invited me. So my monkey is making me nervous with all these thoughts. So I want to share with you how this monkey, is actually influencing our view of the world. So take, for example, Soumyaji, have you heard of the fact that in the media and in economics textbooks, you're told that there is a first world and a third world, a
Yeah.
developing world and an underdeveloped world, right? A developing
Yeah.
world and a developed world. We are told this and we just accept it. Now think about it. I would say, taking Osho's wisdom into me, I began to see another angle to this. There is nothing like a developed world and an underdeveloped world. There aren't first world and third world. This is just global racism. Why? And global racism based on the chattering monkey of European culture and European economists. For example, let's assume I have a PhD in economics, okay? I go to a fishing village somewhere. Let's assume I come from America with a PhD in economics, okay, from a big city like Chicago, and I go to a fishing village somewhere. In the fishing village, what do I see? Let us say I go to Samoa, and I don't know how much you know about Samoa, but let's say I see people who are dressed in leaves, clothes made out of leaves. Do you think I will just say, oh, people are dressed in clothes made out of leaves? No. Immediately, my chattering monkey will say, these people are primitive. They don't have any clothes here, right? So immediately, my chattering monkey will say, these people are primitive. Next, I see the people in this fishing village, when they're thirsty, they drink water. They're not drinking Coca-Cola. So what will my chattering monkey say? These people are poor. They don't have orange juice and Coca-Cola here. Notice how the voice in my head, which is constantly making these judgments, is creating a perception of these people as primitive and poor. Now, you know that in modern societies, we create these marble bathrooms and all of that when we have to go. In some of these societies which live more naturally, they use compostable toilets. They create a part of the beach where there is, they dig out a hole in the sand, which is used as a bathroom. So I say, oh my God, these people don't even have flush outs and bathrooms here. They are so barbaric. Notice what is happening. Continuously, there are inner judgments being made. And I'm going to show you how these inner judgments are affecting my perception of the world. So, for example, the first time my chattering monkey says these people are poor, I start wearing lenses. And I use lenses because notice that although the voice is in my ear, it is going to affect the way I see the Samoan people. Now I see people through the lens of poor. Everybody looks poor to me. Next, when they're just drinking water and not expensive carbonated drinks, he says they are so primitive. Now, all of a sudden, I see the people as poor and primitive. And next, when I see that they don't have marble toilets and they just go to the bathroom in the sand, I say they're so barbaric. Now, notice, can you see that now I'm seeing the Samoan people, a beautiful culture of Samoan people, through my lens of Western economics, and they appear poor, primitive, and barbaric. Now, this is what European culture has done worldwide. They have taken their chattering monkey too seriously and they start wearing lenses. Now, can you see that through three pairs of lenses, I cannot see the beauty of Samoan culture anymore? And the same thing happens. I worked in the World Bank where they will go to beautiful cultures, travel. And then when they come back to the head office, I said, okay, you've been to such a beautiful culture. You went to India. What were your impressions? It's a third world country. Because through three pairs of lenses, I just see people as poor, primitive, and barbaric. I cannot see the beauty of the culture anymore. Imagine that I take my child with me, right, who has never been to school, who has never taken a course in economics. My child will be more enlightened. She will play with the people of Samoa. She will learn their stories. She will learn their dances. She will experience a culture. But her father, with a PhD in economics, cannot experience the culture. He becomes blind. He only sees people as poor, primitive, and barbaric. Now, this is the damaging effect of education. As a result of this, we have taken on the idea that India is a third world country, right? And this way, we are creating divisions in the world. We are putting on lenses. And the challenge is to be able to take out the lenses so that we can see the beauty of different cultures. And I think the younger people today are becoming aware of this much more. They're traveling much more, and they're awakening to the greatness of other cultures that are very different than their own. Sorry, that was a bit of a long answer, but I'm very passionate about this topic because this idea that 3/4 of the world's population is third world is a European idea, and it has, it smacks of global racism, but now it has been taught through our textbooks and the media, and it has become very strongly entrenched in people's ways of looking at the world.
Param, now I have started to think that the phrase, it is the white man's burden, can also be a result of this chattering monkey.
Yeah.
And it is. And racism could be a product of this. So that was just very beautiful. I've seen your videos, Param, and you doing it in front of me is just so beautiful for me to actually see you live doing this and explaining this. And I'm sure that through our medium, the people who are going to watch this video will also reconsider the way they think and they have their outlook on things. So that was beautiful.
Thank you.
My next question is on a very light note. It is related to the concept of weekends and how it was, introduced in the time of Industrial Revolution and how people could, actually have a day or two to themselves. However, the present day implication of it is simply completing your leftover university or job work. So what are some of the psychological setbacks that these prolonged work hours could have on any individual? That is my question.
Could you repeat the last part of the question? It wasn't clear. I couldn't hear you.
Yes. My last part was, what are some of the psychological setbacks that these prolonged work hours could have on any individual?
Excuse me, sorry. Yeah, I think this idea that we can compartmentalize the weekend and the weekdays, work and play are separate, to create a boundary is extremely detrimental. Because what that has done, it has led humanity to ignore the quality of work life, saying, you can sacrifice 5 days of the week if you have 1 or 2 days where you can do whatever you want. And we have compartmentalized this. I think one of the important questions to ask is, why did we create this boundary between work and play? And a lot of it hinges on the distinction between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So much of organizational behavior is based on the idea of extrinsic motivation, that you
Hmm.
work in order to get paid, you work in order to get promoted. And these are the ideas that have led to a quality of work life being ignored. And I think it is very important for us to start addressing the question, how can we create an environment that is so fulfilling and empowering that the boundary between work and play disappears? Now, what is work and what is play? You will recognize that sometimes we are at work, but it starts feeling like play. And sometimes we think we are playing, but it actually starts feeling like work. The distinction is actually in terms of engagement. How engaged are we? And I think we need to look at ways in which we can help people build that kind of engagement at work. I want to share with you very briefly, and before we run out of time, the ways in which that kind of engagement can be built in a very creative way. I remember when I was in New Delhi, I was born in New Delhi, lived in Mumbai most of my life. In New Delhi, there was a policeman, near Rashtrapati Bhavan, who was always joyous. And he would do his 8-hour shifts, but he would always be joyous. Why? Because he was actually very fond of Bharatanatyam dance. And what he had done is he had choreographed dance sequences that he had woven in to directing traffic. So he would direct traffic like this, and he would weave his dancing into how he was guiding traffic. I will never forget that policeman, because that to me reminded me of how, when people start weaving what they most care about in life, what they're most passionate about, to their work in some way. Now, he was able to make a connection between dancing and guiding the traffic, through aesthetically beautiful movements. It is for each one of us to see what can we learn from this policeman's life, the ways in which we don't create this compartmentalization. And of course, a lot is in the hands of employers. And as long as employers are just looking at people as a pair of hands rather than as a soul, we are going to be fighting this problem. So I think the idea that you forget about this present moment because the vacation is in the future. Remember, mystics like Osho have reminded us of the waiting for Godot syndrome. The waiting for Godot syndrome is that today is very boring and terrible, but tomorrow will be great. The weekend will be here. If we live in the future, that is no way. The challenge is for us to live in the present and to make this present more beautiful, more enchanting, and more exciting. So I do think that the idea that you can sacrifice the present because the weekend will be there to rescue you is a very unfortunate thing. We have to create an environment in which work is so meaningful that in this moment we are really have that constant experience of growth. But I know that the ground level realities are far away from this, and it almost seems absurd for a college professor like me to talk about this topic, which is so far removed from what people are facing on a day-to-day basis. So I have to apologize for that.
Param, I also have a question on this question only. I have another question. Living in a capitalist society, don't you think that the fact that we get to enjoy a weekend is also is because of the privilege that we have? For example, a woman, a maid working in houses in India, she is not aware of this concept. And like you said, the way we've built this society where people are actually just fighting for a day or two to relax, and they are working today because they think that maybe in the future I can get a sort of rest. So isn't this all just because of the capitalist society that we're living in right now?
I agree with you. I'm not saying take away people's
Yeah,
weekends,
yeah,
not at
yeah,
all. I think the
yeah.
weekend is very important. All I'm saying is taking the example of the maid. This human being is, let's say, working in a house for 8 hours. If we torture this person for 8 hours saying, I'm giving her the weekend free, that would not be the right way to approach it. Her weekend is her birthright, but also not to lose focus on the fact that she is not a maid. She's a person with a name. And when we look upon her as an employee, as a maid, we are reducing her to a category. And one of the
Yeah.
challenges in modern life is that we have so many categories and labels for people that these labels become who they are. And we forget that this person is actually a human being. and with a real story. And their stories, when we actually listen to the stories of people and what their life has been like, you will recognize that that person may be a maid in our eyes, but if she tells her story, some Bollywood producer can actually make a movie based on her life. There is so much richness in her life. And that is what we have to awaken to, that every human being, as Osho reminded us, and this is one of the most powerful aspects of Osho's teaching, every human being is unique, special, and extraordinary. Anybody down the street, a beggar, a homeless person down the street, Osho would have reminded us that there's no other human being exactly like them in this entire planet. So you are unique, special, and extraordinary. I can look at the entire planet. There will not be another person like Saumya Tiwari anywhere that I will find. You are the only person in the entire galaxy who is like you. And when we awaken to that, we don't become egoistic. I may be unique, special, and extraordinary, but every person that I see, there is no other person like them. It's only when we awaken to the sacredness of people, to recognize that any person you're looking at is actually a masterpiece of nature. There's no other human being like them in the entire planet, that we develop a deep reverence for them and we go beyond categories and labels.
I love how you beautifully introduced the concept of social conditioning without actually taking its name. And you made us realize that we are so much more than the labels that society has given us. So that was beautiful. And my last question for tonight to you, Param, is that there are conversations surrounding mental health in mass media today. So, what are some of the initiatives taken by the universities and corporates in the USA to make the environment more inclusive and people more mindful?
Excellent. I think there have been a number of employee assistance programs which makes it possible to seek mental health resources, counseling, and all that when people run into a lot of stress. But I don't think the US is the model. I would encourage people, if they can get hold of a movie called Where to Invade Next, Where to Invade Next, where they show the extent to which leisure is valued so much in places like Italy. In many of the European countries, they have taken much better steps. Like, for example, I've heard that in Germany, it's even illegal to contact an employee after work hours. And if anybody is stressed, they can take time off and be given a referral to some form of rehabilitative care, like at a spa or something. I think the European countries actually are the ones that we have to look at in terms of protecting the work-life balance. I think American culture is a workaholic culture. In terms of workaholism, I don't think the US is very different than India. The whole people just live to work. That is the idea. And life is so mechanical. The joy of life just has disappeared because everything has become mechanical. And I think when I want to end with one quick example, and I know I'm going over time, and I
No,
want
you are
us to
not.
remember this. In Finland, the country
Yeah,
Finland,
yeah.
used to be number 29 when it came to educational quality across the world in school children. Finland and the US were both number 29 in terms of quality and performance of children in educational standards. They took one simple step and they became number one on the list. You will be surprised what that simple step was. Finland eliminated all homework. Who would think that if you eliminate all homework, you will go from being 29 in the world to being number one in the world in terms of education? Because at last, children had the time and space to be more mindful, to think creatively. Whereas in many of the other educational systems, we burden children with so much homework that we are converting them into machines. They may become very efficient, but really, is efficiency the objective or the flowering of human consciousness? The biggest mistake we have made is that in factories, quality is achieved by standardization. You want every chair, every table that is manufactured in the factory to look the same. But in education, standardization is poison. You want every child thinking differently, every teacher teaching differently. And therefore, this factory-based standardization model has done tremendous damage to education. We have to just start celebrating the uniqueness of every child as opposed to standardization. And less work, ironically, will actually make people more productive, because then they will have a time to recharge and energize their batteries.
Param, my chattering monkey tells me that my team and I, we are privileged and we are so honored to have you today with us. This session was so beautiful. We talked about spirituality, we talked about work life. We actually, not me, we, you, ended up giving
We
people
did.
a perspective. Oh, you did. That was all you. You gave people a very creative perspective, and the examples you came up with, the way you illustrated everything. I think whatever you did today is going to have an impact in the mind of so many people. So thank you, Param, for connecting with us, and we hope to have more shows with you in the future. It was just so beautiful to have you today with us. Thank you so much,
It's a
Param.
privilege. I want to thank Swami Shailendra Saraswati for introducing us. I just want to leave with all these words, beyond all the words, one of the most beautiful sentiments Osho has given us. And I would like to end with that when we fall in love with ourselves and we accept ourselves just the way we are, it is only when our relationship with ourselves is at peace, is one of love and compassion, that we can then radiate love and compassion to people around us. Thank you so much, and I'm profoundly grateful to you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Param.
Thank you. Thank you.